I want to teach you guys something, but I need to get rid of the short attention span people first, so I'll wait. Still waiting. About 70% of you still left to go. There we go. Okay. So now that I've gotten rid of all the short attention span people, we can talk about something that's actually rather important, and that's the idea of understanding why you're taught certain things and why you're not taught other things. So there's two different kinds of mentalities. There's actually, I mean, if you want to think of it in this way, and I'm going to simplify this. It's more complicated than that, but I'm going to try and simplify this. There is a sort of a positive personality and negative personality. Now, that doesn't mean what you think it means. I'm not applying this from like some, psychology type perspective. I'm talking about the idea of what people will see, so it's the glass half full, half empty kind of thing, right? Okay. So the half empty people, those people are important because what they'll see is what's not there. Now that's actually really important, and it gets us skewed, right? Like, we don't want that, but it's like, that's because that's what you're trained for. You're trained to see what's there and be happy and all that kind of stuff. What you forget to learn is how to see what isn't there. So let's look at your education. Most people's education, you're shown all these kinds of factoids, and you memorize a bunch of stuff and so forth, name dates, battle history, etc. I mean, all these kinds of crazy things. But what do you notice that you're not being taught? A few people have noticed this, and I see a few videos on this, and I'm glad to see that there's more people that are starting to kind of get this idea. What are you never taught? There's two things, largely, that you're really never taught. The first is etymology. You're not really taught a lot about where your words come from. Because if you knew etymology, or if you study like where a lot of words come from, and of course the internet's getting harder and harder to do that because they're changing a lot of the history. Right? Because you have to almost go find old encyclopedias in print, like first editions from the 20s, to try and find anything that's accurate, because they're changing so much of it because people are doing Google searches and then saying, oh, this is fact. Yeah. So that's a problem. So etymology, the words you use are not typically really fleshed out, especially the really important words like anacyclosis. I'll come back to that one. The next one is money and the history of money. You know how you see younger people, they're like, why was I never taught about insurance? Why was I never taught about how to balance a checkbook? Why was I never taught any of this stuff? Yeah, you were never taught any of that because, see, if you understand that stuff, as kids will start asking questions, right? That's what they do. Because you're born a scientist. You are born a researcher. You are born to start questioning everything around you. You're designed to do that. Kids do this very naturally. Well, if you start doing that, then that means they have to figure out how to answer those questions, and they don't want to. Who is they? Well, that would be the people who control the education system. All of those people who control the education or the indoctrination system, they can't have you asking those types of questions. Because then but for obvious reasons, right? Because then you start to see the scam for what it is. Okay? So that's why you're not taught about money, and then more importantly, you're really not taught about the history of money. Because if you understood the history of money, you would start to see what a lot of the philosophers don't see. Okay? Because it's a personality type. From what I've seen, a lot of the philosophers out there, even the ancient philosophers, they talk about what's going on and what's happening and so on, but there's always something missing from the texts. Somehow, some way, it gets removed from the text almost. Not because these guys are dumb, no, they know what's going on, but because we can't have that conversation, and that's usually the money conversation. And so if you don't know the history of how these things affect it, then the cycle can just continue. And if you know what the cycle is going to be, right, This is that anacyclosis. Anacyclosis, roughly translated, means another cycle or another vicious cycle. Usually things that end with cis, S-I-S, usually mean something bad, like, necrosis, cirrhosis, halitosis. They're usually things that are bad, right? Psychosis. That's how these things kind of work. So when anacyclosis simply means the cycle of the world, right? If you want to think about it like that. Now, and it's part of your monarchy, and then it moves on to tyranny, which then gives way to aristocracy and so forth. You can look it up. Anyway, the point is that it loops back around on itself, and then we get this whole thing starts over again. Well, there's something missing, and it's always the money aspect. How does it keep doing that? How is it? It's because when you finally get around to democracy, demos and kratian, when you get around to democracy, which is effectively going to inevitably lead to mob rule, when you get around to that again, the mob is never restrained. The majority is never restrained. The majority just continue to say, I want free fill in the blank. I want bread and circuses. I want free healthcare. I want this. I want that. There's never this thought given to, okay, well, how do we, they don't go far enough to think, how does that work? Where does that come from? You can do that on a very small level, but as soon as you get on a macro level, it's impossible. And that's why it always goes in these little cycles. And the people who want to control that, they understand those cycles. And they control it through money. That's the part that's why you're not taught it. Because if you were taught this, you were taught that, then you would understand one of the biggest reasons that the Roman Empire had the problems that it did, and the Soviet Empire, and the Maoist Empire, and on and on and on. The reason those empires all have the problems that they do, even the smaller empires, the lesser known ones, is they eventually run out of everybody else's money. That's exactly what happens, because they have to start making a bunch of promises to people. Hey, let's go over there and take this country, and we're going to take all their resources and so on. Okay, that's great. Then are we done? And then we can all live these happy? No, we need to do something else now. Yeah, so that's kind of how that works. It's because the people that they're paying interest to, right? It's a black hole. It's just a vacuum. And the money eventually runs out because of the interest that's paid. So now, there was someone who tried to get rid of interest back in the day. It's that little mustache guy. Historically true, he did. He got rid of the idea of usury, and then created a currency. That was the same thing. It's like this is the attempt to break that cycle, and it really isn't, because all that would happen is you would lead, once again, it would lead right eventually to tyranny and then to aristocracy, and so that's exactly what would end up happening again. Again, because of the money issue, because there isn't an actual fixed unit of measurement. You already see where I'm going with this. For those out there who don't understand how money works, you will eventually be a slave to somebody who does. Every single time. Every single time. And it doesn't make any difference what your religion is. It doesn't make any difference what your background is. It doesn't make any difference what you look like, what your skin color is. None of that matters. If you don't understand how and why money works the way that it works, particularly the why, which I have a whole series on why it works that way. On YT. But if you understand that stuff, then you can kind of remove yourself from the cycle, and you're like, well, but then everything really super sucks. Yes, because very few people understand it. That's why you end up doing a lot of things yourself, because division of labor takes also the division of labor of people who understand all these kinds of things. So in other words, it's the Ben Franklin thing, where a republic, if you can keep it. If you can keep it. That's, and that is not said without any cynicism. I promise you, I want to say it this way. I am reasonably certain that was said with a fair helping of cynicism in his voice. If you can keep it. Because that's what it takes. It takes education, and it takes being able to, and it takes literacy. I don't mean necessarily literacy in terms of being able to read words on a page. Active literacy means being able to add context to what you're reading. Active context, in fact, and that gives it depth. So that's why you're not taught any of this stuff, and it's why no one talks to you like this when you're in schools. Right? I don't wager there's too many people that will talk to you like this in any school that I've ever seen.